Are you going to tee it up?
Yeah, let's tee it up. Well, again,
All right.
going back to...
We're live. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the weekly Jargon. I'm Abel Perez.
I am Jose Rodriguez.
Rohi Zachariah.
And we are the weekly Jargoners. And today, what are we talking about, Jose?
Well, you know, Rohi and I were having an interesting conversation in regards to the amount of labor and the pay for that labor. And more importantly, does it correlate that a person can work 8 to 5 daily for a skill that they have, but yet they're not able to accumulate wealth over long periods of time. And the example that I used was someone that lays concrete, for example, or someone with a special skill. And when I say lay concrete, maybe not a union person, but someone that has that skill that is paid anywhere between $20 to $30 an hour, can work 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, and yet can just barely scratch the surface and make ends meet at the end of the month. Now, there's a skill, but at the same time, they're not able to really accumulate wealth. And then you have these huge corporations and or maybe, let's say, millionaires and or billionaires that look at that and they can extract that labor from you in a way almost a modern, would you say modern slavery in a way? I mean, I hate to use that word, but I mean, we are conditioned to work 8 to 5. Right? Sometimes some people work longer hours than others, but at the end of the day, you're trading in all these hours for this amount of money that barely keeps you alive.
Yeah.
Would that be a definition of a modern day slave?
No.
Okay. And that's kind of the way we're teeing this off.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
So maybe I can
Go ahead, Brian. I want to hear Abel's no. I'd like to.
Yeah, look, when I hear about market value, right, being in real estate, right, obviously we provide mortgage financing, and so we get to see the real estate transactions, and you get to hear the sorrows of real estate often, especially here in California. It's expensive, right? Homes are expensive. And the question is always, why are they so expensive? Why do they have their price point so high? Why are we building these new homes, and why are they so expensive, right? Well, it's because people are willing to buy them, and people are willing to pay for it. And because of that, now you have a market, right? And so when we talk about skilled labor, the value of that skill, there is a price tag on it. What are people willing to pay for sidewalks or a driveway? Or if it's just a simple individual who knows how to do concrete, you know, what are they willing to pay for that versus what are they willing to pay for heart surgery to prolong their life? You know, what are they willing to pay for machinery to be able to produce at a higher level in their factories, right? And so you have to consider that, and it's not okay just to have a skill and say, well, I'm skilled, why am I not wealthy? Well, you have to look at what your skill is, and there's a value on it. There's a price tag on it, right? And I think that in today's world, we have career schools like in high school. I think they're doing a pretty good job of trying to expose them to all of these different opportunities and not just talk to them about, hey, if you want to be a welder, this is how you weld and, you know, make sure your line's straight, but the business surrounding that, right? Creating a business plan around that. So now you take that person who has a skill of concrete, you get them a few jobs under their belt, but if you can start giving them a business or finance type skill or a leadership skill where they can have 10 of them, now they're doing 10 times the amount of work, and now ABC Concrete could make them a millionaire, right? Now they are wealthy, but it's not that individual isolated skill that's going to make it happen, right? So that's why, you know, it's like, okay, we want to say, yeah, that's slavery and, you know, I got to work, but it's not, because you do have the freedom to expand your knowledge, expand your skill base, and improve on that. So that's my no.
I mean, I'll look at it in a couple points. Like what I see, you know, is especially when you look at now, like the Starbucks, like them becoming union. You know, it's kind of hitting at your point of like, okay, they're a barista. They made your coffee this morning. They're getting paid still pretty good money, but they're getting this push to unionize because they want to make more money. And instead of saying like what you're saying is looking at it like you've learned a skill, you know how to make coffee, go open a coffee shop. You know, but again, we've had this consolidation that says like you're saying, like that model sounds great. Like I go get a job, I learn how to lay concrete, then I open my own concrete business, and then I start opening more. But everybody wants to do that. And then what you have is now this saturation of people fighting for that contract. And now instead of saying, well, there was only 3 contractors that would do concrete, now there's 10.
Right.
And I'm willing to pay less than the other guy if you give me, and we start fighting to the bottom to where now the owner is going to start making less than the employee. You know, and that, I see a lot of that in again, different industries. We see it in our security business. I mean, same aspect. You know,
Right.
somebody comes work security, this is easy. I'm going to open my own security business. And now there's 100 of us fighting for a single contract, and they're willing to race to the bottom because, you know, they have maybe 5 employees versus, a larger corporation. But it's tough because, again, it goes back to it's what's getting taught is the labor aspect. Yeah, I know how to fix a pipe. I know how to lay concrete. Do you know how to open a business? Do you know how to run a business? Do you know about payroll? Do you know about, and I've seen that with a couple people that I know that they became doctors. And they know the profession. They can treat you for anything, but they open a practice and they go like, I don't know anything about hiring an employee, paying an employee, you know.
Right.
And all of a sudden it's like there's a whole business aspect to just, being a doctor. you know.
Right.
So,
And I'll piggyback on that because you're right. It's the race to the bottom. And to Abel's point that, in a free society where capitalism thrives, is there really no intervention with government? I think when you have certain businesses that are regulated by government, then obviously it kind of sways a certain way. It's kind of biased in a way. So there is a concentration of maybe wealth going a certain way when government in a way dictates where it goes. In a free economy, I do believe in that because there's going to be a demand for services. And if someone can provide that demand, then I feel that, that person will prosper because they are supplying for the demand that's out there. In today's society, in today's economy, it's somewhat like that. It's like a hybrid. There's heavily regulated by the government, so therefore certain contracts can go that way, go this way, and it's not really kind of to Rohi's point. A lot of times it may be a race at the bottom where this person that has a very valuable skill may have to underbid just to try to get that bid. Like you said, there's maybe 10, 20 others. At the end of the day, you're working basically for peanuts. And sometimes that is the sacrifice people take to try to make it to the top, right? That you have to undergo all these process and failures just to get there. But at the end of the day, you still fall short.
well, you look at, they had an article about Temu, this, I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but it's like basically a direct China purchasing kind of thing. So, it's competing against like AliExpress and some of these other big guys. But they were talking about how this corporation is losing $40 on every order that you make. So they were saying like, well, how does that even make sense? How does a corporation lose money? And it's a good model because they know that every time you buy from them, you're not buying from their competitor. And now it's a marketing, it's an attack tactic that they have a backing that says, okay, they're going to maybe lose, like 900 million this year, but they have another backer that's making billions a year. So it's not a big deal if they can wipe out the competition. It's a weird strategy, but that's kind of, this mindset of racing to the bottom, like you're saying, is like, okay, I'll take a contract. I may lose $10, but if Jose's corporation or company can't take it, he's out of work for that whole time. He's got no business. So do that a couple more times. Jose folds up. I go buy all his equipment for nothing. And I have all his contracts, so.
And the one thing I do see, for example, like in our industry, right, we're all real estate professionals, whether you be in the mortgage or real estate, we're always competing for those same services, right? We're competing for trying to provide the client an experience of owning home ownership, right? And what makes that buyer want to, what makes it attractive to go, for example, Abel versus me versus anybody out there, right? Well, a lot of it has to do with the services, but in today's environment, I think it really comes down to, well, I need to be able to afford. I like Abel, I like Jose, but man, Corporation B over here is offering me all these other incentives that I can't pass up on, right? And so a lot of it is competition, and like you said, a lot of times they may offer certain incentives that may push that client to go a different way and steer, even though they may be losing. Like you said, it's not giving any to your competitors, and you start seeing a mass exit in the real estate industry. Not sure if that's happened now, but I'm sure people are starting to feel the waters and saying, "Whoa, man, it's getting difficult. It's getting cutthroat, and maybe it's time for me to find something else that's more sustainable and more fixed." Now, to the point that I made earlier about modern day slavery, well, look at it this way: people, consumers, at least for the most part, they have to acquire debt in order for them to continue to succeed in not buying a house, buying a car,
Not true,
student
but yeah,
loan,
I'll agree with that.
right? And so you start in life, 18-year-olds, you go to school, you get yourself caught up in a $50,000 debt. Aside from that, you get out of school, you get somewhat of a job. I'm not going to say it's a really high-paying job, but you get a decent job. Now you have student debt behind you. You now want to acquire a home, so now there's more debt included. You got a vehicle, there's more debt included, and you have all your other expenses that you have, modern day, credit cards and what have you. Before you know it, personal loans and everything, you're inundated with debt. So you know you can't get out of that debt. I mean, it's easy to file bankruptcy, but certainly certain federal debts and or homes, I mean, you would be out of a home. Obviously, you'd still have your student loan. So you can get away with some of the smaller debts and stuff, but you have all this debt and you have to work for that, right? So now you're placed in a job that puts you from 8 to 5, sometimes 6, 7 days a week in order to catch up and try to make it. So you see all these other influencers on these platforms saying, be rich, be rich. Well, shit, that's an easy, you're just throwing out some bait out there. You're chumming for bait because it's easy. Who doesn't want to have we're emotional beings, and who doesn't want to have that easy fix to get there, whether it be Robinhood, whether it be selling, flipping, doing this, doing that. But like you said, it takes a certain discipline to do that. It's not going to happen overnight because you saw an infomercial or you saw some type of social media gimmick to say, here, this is how I did it. You can do it too. And granted that there is people that get there, but I mean, think about it. If you're going through these issues, doesn't that sound good? It's like taking the snake oil, right, and just saying this is going to fix you of all problems.
Well, that's the, I was gonna say I don't think when we're talking about the modern day slave or who's the slave master, I don't put the blame on the employers, but I think Rohi mentioned earlier it's the credit card debt. It is the debt that now ties you and makes you required to work, right? Because now you have to. Right, so now you take whatever skill you have, you plug it in. Okay, how much you willing to give me? Okay, yeah, that sounds good. And then you acquire a lifestyle based off of that, right? Now, Mad Men, right, the marketing teams, that is their job to get you to buy, right? And we've talked about certain books, right? The Power of Habit and how corporations are, tap it into our psyche to get us to buy, to get us to spend, right? I mean, that's their business. It's a skill. We talk about somebody with the skill, right? Somebody that does concrete. Well, what is a corporation willing to pay for somebody who's with a skill that can tap into consumers and get them to spend more, get them to, request increases on their credit limits, get them to max out that credit card and pay interest for the rest of their lives, right? That, I think, is the slave master right there. It's debt. And you're right. I mean, you're right in the sense of the American dream. I think that's what we can call it, right? The American dream is you buy your house, you have your car, you picket fence, you go to Disneyland once a year, you go camping, twice a year. You do all of these things, but now you start looking at it, you're like, man, where did I get those ideas from? That's commercial, right? Now it's commercialized. You have to do this. If you're a good family man or you're a good man, you take your family to vacation at these areas and you spend this kind of money, right? So now then we get tied up into the debt as well, right? So yeah, I think that's the problem right there. That's who I would point at as the slave master.
The ball and chain
is the debt.
Well, I'll paint you another picture because we had this discussion with somebody yesterday. So he's a parent. He's got 2 kids, or actually 3 kids. And they're all over the age of 18. They all have good jobs, but 2 of them are living at home rent-free. They don't pay for groceries. They don't pay for electricity, nothing. And, it to me, like when you talk about where are we going? And I think Abel, you said it right because you said you get the American dream. You get married and you have kids and and you're accumulating this debt. But there's a generational gap now that says that's not the idea now. These people are not getting married. They have a good job. They're not buying a home. They're staying with mom and dad, and they're just spending it on themselves. I'm sure to some degree there is a little bit of saving, but I think the majority of those people are, again, just they splurge on themselves because they're not married, they don't have kids, they don't have any real debt to society except maybe they buy a car or something. And to me, when you go back now, again, I think that the slavery in our aspect is we're used to that. We had the kids, we bought the house, now we have to pay the bills. Now I think the roles have changed. I think our kids are going to be our slave masters because they're not paying for the bills. I have to pay the bills. I have to work to make sure that they're happy because they're not going to pitch in. And it was just bringing about the question of, at what point do we start putting that burden upon them? What time do we start saying, hey, life costs money and, you need to start paying? Do we start from now when they're kids and start saying, hey, look, because I've seen that where they start saying you get an allowance, but then $5 of that 10 has to go to your rent and to your food and
start conditioning them.
Start conditioning them. Do we start it then, or do we say, okay, you're 18, you're an adult, get out of my house? What model is really going to be the best model going forward? Knowing that, again, the majority of kids nowadays of age are not really looking to get married. They don't want another home. They don't want this big crazy debt. They want to be able to work. Like you said, maybe instead of that Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, they'll take 3-4 days off. They'll take a month off because they don't really have to worry about a house bill or an electric bill or whatever. So,
it's funny because as we go back to the history of generations, right, especially when folks first started coming out here in the 1900s, and prior to that, we can go back to colonial times. But back then, people coming in freshly off ships from Europe, coming into Ellis Island, into New York, their aspirations were to, hey, how do I get involved in this economy or this changing world that's given me an opportunity to hopefully someday be able to create something that's there for me. So the strive for trying to accumulate some type of, whether it be a home or some type of wealth, has shifted. Because to your point, you look in the 50s, and 50s became this thing where like consumer exploded, this consumer, this consumer spending, or, people coming back from the war, dishwashers, stoves, vehicles, everything that was really catered to the new generation that was coming up, which were the baby boomers. And now, to your point, you're starting to see this generation that doesn't want to go out there and get married, doesn't want to go out and live that American dream. So the ideology has shifted a little bit. The way I look at it is, you're going to be, in your lifetime, a third of your lifetime is going to be sleeping, right? Would you agree that a third of your lifetime? That means that 2/3 of your life, you'll have 2/3 of your life to do one or two things, right? The other third could be work, right? So then another 8 hours you spend throughout the day working, and that's the majority of that's another third of your life. Some people go beyond that. And then you have that additional third that's going to be left to you and what you want to do in this world. I don't know if that equation has been the same since the time of when this industrialized nation started. But I know that it's shifting because more and more folks don't want to go and pursue that ideology that we had back in the 50s up until just maybe my generation, Generation X. I still wanted to have the white picket fence, the dream of having my kids hopefully acquire something that my dad couldn't give us, right? We wanted to make sure that we can put them in a higher step of wealth so that they can, so they wouldn't struggle as much. But that's kind of shifting now. I'm starting to see more and more of the millennials saying, well, wait a minute, I don't have to get married at 25. I can wait till I'm 30-something. I can spend more on myself. I can treat myself, and I can look at the world a little differently now. And I think that may be a shift in ideology in the way generations are thinking now, is that, hey, I don't want to work for the rest of my life. Shit, man. I may have to work 10 hours a day just to try to get by. Instead, I'm going to treat myself. I don't have the expense of having to take care of a family of 6, family of 5, family of 4. So like you said, it is less expensive. And that may be the way, because that's how we're being pushed, how money works today. Inflation obviously has a lot to do with it. But if the price of goods are going up, but the price of wages is staying stagnant, I mean, it's going to push us to do certain things. And I think the element behind all of it is not only debt, but it's also how we accumulate that money to be able to help us get to a certain goal.
Yeah, well, you touched it, inflation, right? I mean, there's also that to consider, and what's grandma and grandpa, lived off of grandpa's, carpentry salary, and had a house, and raised 5 kids, and there was all of that, right? Is that possible today, right? Same house, same neighborhood, and mind you, that was probably one of the worst neighborhoods in town at the time, and you park right back there, and it would be hard. Or if you take somebody who's 25 trying to start a young family, and they bought that house and they have that lifestyle, we'd be saying, man, you're doing pretty good for yourself. Good job. When 20, 30 years ago it was, man, this is rough. Grandma and grandpa are poor. Things like that. But I think rising housing prices, cost of living. Meanwhile, wages, staying pretty stagnant. But again, that's skill. That's the skill level, right? We're moving away from, carpentry type work. Well, there's union works right now, right? And those union employees are making quite a bit of money, but maybe not necessarily in this area, right? There's people who are willing to travel, do things like that. But it's all about modifying that skill and increasing that skill. You take a skill, you take a knack for, driving in nails into wood, and you amplify that, right? So, okay, now what can I do? Can I be a stair designer? Can I be, start tapping into engineering, whatever the case may be? But you just have to keep growing that, because unfortunately those standardized skills aren't enough. And I think it is because of inflation. And let me ask you guys a question, because I am a millennial, right? And so I see quite a bit of I can see your point, Rohi, where there's some people that that aren't wanting to move forward, right? With families or that traditional American dream, but then I also see the other side of it where I think the majority of millennials. So millennials are from age 26 to 42 right now, right? I think that's like the range. But on a 30-year average, in the last 30 years, the average age of a first-time home buyer is age 35. So millennials are right in the middle, right in that sweet spot of being first-time home buyers, right? So they're kind of millennials should barely start buying houses. Mm-hmm. And throughout the history, throughout U.S. Statistics, it shows that 35 is that age. So would you say that maybe, individuals who are from 35 to, 55, 60 years old, maybe they're putting a little bit more pressure on the millennials, like, man, you're 22 already. You don't, mm-hmm. You haven't started doing this. When really, is that a bad thing? Build your career, get established, don't rush into marriage, don't rush into having kids. Right when you cruise around 30 years old, you're ready to settle down. Now you're getting married. Now you're buying your home at 35. Does that create more stability?
You want to tackle that first, or?
Well, I'll kind of answer it like this. So, I was talking to one of my customers yesterday. He works for Pepsi. He's a driver, and he was talking about the struggles they have right now finding drivers. And he says it's odd because they are the highest paying company for drivers. He said, but there's a catch. He said your first year you make less than everybody else, and he says that's the biggest problem is people that get into it can't see the future and realize if I put my 1 year in with a little less pay, the next year I make more than everybody else. And he says it's amazing because they're so impulsive about what they want to do. It's like I want it now,
right?
And I think that's again that a lot of it is what's fueling these younger generations today is that they want what they want right now. Like, okay, I want to go buy the new car. I don't want to have to worry about asking you for permission. I want to do it on my own.
Right.
And it's my money. I don't have any other expenses. And I think that's kind of what's driving them to want to stay home is because they feel like they have, they're in control of their own lives. Whereas now once you get married, you start having these kids and you start having these expenses, it's like, well, I got to ask you for permission. And, and maybe you don't do that all the time, but you have to do it on the bigger expenses. And they don't like that. They want to do it on their own.
Yeah, and the question itself, Abel, is maybe there's a cultural shift or a generational shift in thinking, right? And that, culturally, I know me coming from immigrant parents was, try to get married early, right? I mean, by the time you hit 20 some, I mean, you're already starting to look for a partner or a spouse or someone that you can partner up with and hopefully like-minded culturally, and then you start building on that, right? And am I there already there? Am I a little premature on that? Am I seasoned enough to be able to go out and tackle the world, know how to take care of children, how to be a great parent? No, but that's again a tradition that happens with a lot of different cultures, right? And for me, I can tell you that early on, that was the expectation, is that if you go on, you graduate from high school, you go on to some college soon after, then you're ready, right? You're seasoned enough to move on, start a family, buy a house, buy a car. And that was my goal. So at 26, I think I started early trying to buy my first house. I didn't know shit about buying a home, to be honest with you. I was in the industry, but I didn't know really how to manage my debt, how to do all these things. So I didn't give myself and splurge on myself a lot, because moving, quickly after I came back from school, I wanted to get married. And again, there was something inside of me culturally said that you need to push yourself to get there, right? And I'm sure my spouse felt the same way, because we both come from similar backgrounds. But thinking now, you look at your kids and you say, well, shit, man, I think my kids may be a little immature, or they're just not there yet. They're not there yet. And we hope that they, at some point, develop. And it could be at the age of 35 when they start looking at things and saying, now it's time for me to settle. So no, I don't think that's a problem. I just think it's shifted. Yeah. The age, the time of when you're ready to become a homeowner, maybe get married, that's a personal preference. But I think it has shifted, and that's why the average now is 35, right? But if you compare it to back then, the life expectancy was 65 for an adult male. So shit, I mean, at 35, you're already going through midlife crisis. So you may want to do that a little earlier, maybe in your 20s. Now with medicine, we're living longer. Yeah. Therefore, hey, I got plenty of time. I can do this a little later.
The banks are strategic, though. That's why they have a 30-year fix. So before you die, your house is paid off.
There you go. Yeah.
So, I like where you're going with the the generational shifts. I think every generation calls the next generation soft, right? Yep. Those guys are soft, Man, my dad, the way he used to do it, right? But then I always think, guess you guys raised us, right? You raised us, and then we're raising them, and so we're responsible. We're responsible for the next generation, right? But I think it does come from just kind of a different mindset. For 4th of July, for instance, I congratulations, Rohi and Jose. You guys had a great event in Madera, fireworks shows at the fairgrounds. For me, my grandparents, they're a lot older now, and they've always hosted these holidays, and so it's like, okay, well, we want to keep the family going as long as we can, all together at Grandma and Grandpa's house, because unfortunately, once they pass, that probably starts going away, right? So it's like, keep those traditions alive. And so when we're there and we're hearing stories, Grandma and Grandpa's stories, and people talking, they've been doing that forever. Since they were in their 20s with their kids, running around in their backyard, right? But guess what? Their parents weren't there, right? They were on their own. They didn't have all of their family. But now, so then they grow, they raise their family. Now my dad, all his siblings, now they bring their families, right? And so that dependency, I don't know if it's necessarily dependency, but it's just kind of the way of life now, where we assemble at mom and dad's, and we still have mom and dad. They're just right there, so we're gonna go there. Because otherwise, I'm thinking, man, if I was my grandpa at my age, I would already be having my own thing at my own house with my own children, and that's it, right? But no, I'm not only going to my parents' house. No, I'm still going to Grandma and Grandpa's house, right? So there's a little bit of a lag, if you would, and so I guess that could be considered dependency in certain ways, or if we were to kind of transfer that over to other types of examples, but every every generation or group, ethnic group that has migrated to the Americas has experienced that, right? Grandma and grandpa at some point came over. They settled on their own. Man, how do you guys do it? You were all alone. You left your family back in Europe or Mexico or wherever you came from, right? You left your family back. You came here and you just grew. You grew. And then those generations, they continue on those traditions. And it looks different, right? So yeah, we're not as tough because we didn't have to do it on our own. Mm-hmm. But like Jose said, every generation tries to help the next generation get a little bit further. You know, let me give you a little bit of a head start. And I think if we can do that, now that's where we're starting to see, grandkids in much nicer houses than we lived in, right? And I think that's the goal. Mm-hmm. And they get closer to that, that wealth.
And I will say this, there is a caveat to that, is that if by doing that though, by allowing these generations to grow, at some point, down the line of these generations, complacency settles in. Mm-hmm. And when complacency settles in, this is when you no longer have the strive to try to create, innovate, get out there and do something different, right? You're so complacent with your transferred wealth that essentially you become one of those folks that people say, man, how do they do it? How do we get them down? We need to get there. And this is why revolutions happen, is because after so many generations, you get complacency. You have to instill that work ethic. And it's harder to do as the generations go by, third, fourth, maybe by the sixth. And you see this with the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts and all that. A lot of these kids that are growing up today, 5, 6 generations deep, don't have to work, right? But there's none of that, what's the word I want to say? Just like wanting to do better, and who knows, maybe they're donating money. I don't know, maybe that's something good for them. But the majority of people that have that complacency don't want to go out and strive for those additional goals or go out there like their grandparents did. We still have we still have this ambition to want to do something, right? At least I do, and I know you do too, because we see it. All of us in the type of business that we're in, we're all trying to better ourselves to put our children in better situations. And I think going back to the topic we talked about initially was a modern-day slave, right? Too many people, though, fall backwards in their generation, and they regress instead of progress because they're fall victim to the one thing we talked about, which was debt. Mm-hmm. So if anything's going to come out of the show is get yourself out of debt. And I know it's hard to do because being paid this much money for the amount of labor you put out there just barely makes it there. But the only way I can tell you is that everybody has wants. I have a want list that goes beyond what I make. So I need to be able to narrow that down and make it more of a needs list. What do I need to survive? Well, I need to have a roof over my head, especially today. I need to be able to have put some petrol on my car, especially if you have electricity, you have to pay for the bills. I have to pay for certain things, right? These are the needs list. I need food. So if I can make that list and narrow it down, and I can save some on the side, I can start the foundation of what can essentially grow 2, 3, 4 generations deep, where I can actually put my family in a better situation later. Versus, let me take it all today, let me do it all today, get myself in debt, and regress back. And then essentially, you'll never be able to accomplish that, and your kids will look at that, and that's the same pattern that they'll choose. So I think it's important for us also not only to be a podcast, but also be an inspirational show that helps people. You talked about the Madera show, right? The Madera fireworks. Thanks to Rohi, we were able to put this together. A lot of doubt that it wasn't going to happen, but we were able to make that happen. And thanks to you, Rohi, and just having that ambition to move through the whole negative atmosphere that was out there after what had happened the year before. But look, you continue, you push. And here we are today talking about it. So thank you, Rohi. Appreciate you just keeping that dream alive. Yeah. Right?
I'll just end. I mean, I think as a philosophical answer, I mean, the best fruit of the world is the ones that are stressed, during their growing process. You pull the water, you pull certain, things to cause that fruit to stress on the vine, and that's how you get the best fruit. And I think it's kind of leading into the problems, like you said. We want our kids to have a better, easier life than we did, and we work so much harder. And I think we overwater them and we overfeed them, and they do become soft. I've heard that for at some point we need another war in a sad way because they need to see the struggles. And that I don't know if that's ever going to happen like that, but that's what's happened along the generations is that, every 30, 40 years we get this major war, the world comes to this, struggle. And because of that, the next generation, they grow stronger, and it's sad to think of it that way, but that struggle isn't there. I mean, again, in the United States, we have little to struggle over except debt, except for wanting the new iPhone or the new whatever and whatever, that's all we struggle for. There's plenty of jobs, there's plenty of opportunity, but the downside is, like you said, it does sound good. I would love to be debt free. I love to say everything in my life is paid for, but then am I going to fall into that mindset that says I don't got to go to work today? I'm going to stay home, And then what am I teaching my kids? Hey, kids, don't worry. Look, I worked hard my life. I'm going to stay home, and when I die, you get this house, and you don't have anything to worry about. And they don't realize, well, you got taxes, and you got electricity, and you got food bills, and you got all these things. You have to work. It doesn't ever end, And that never-ending feeling to me is slavery. Because like you said when we talked about it a long time ago, is like you never own your house. Like people, that mindset of like I can never pay enough. That says I never owe the government any more money, even if I pay my note. They own the land, they property taxes, everything. I can never build the biggest solar system on my house that says I'll never have an electric bill. PG&E always charges you something. So that's when you say the modern day slavery, that to me is what it is that feeling that you will never be able to sit back with whatever you've accumulated over life and say, I can just stop, because you can't. It's always
I think
gonna
the
happen.
only way you can do that is once you're buried 6 feet under, right?
Yeah.
And then you can say, well, you can't
Pass
take
it
this
on.
one. But even that,
You pass it on.
before we end the show, I did want to have Abel give us a shout out. Abel, we are a local podcast, and a lot of times if we have local viewers, we also want to share sentiments, especially with certain events that took in place. Now, your wife experienced something here with a friend, right? Would you be able to comment on that and maybe share some condolences to the family?
Yeah. So condolences to the family here in Madera that had recently, 2 days ago, lost their daughter, their niece, to a tragic car accident. And just a reminder, driving drunk or under the influence of any sort is not only detrimental to yourself but to other innocent victims. And this individual, 4 a.m., simply driving to work, and ready to on a Monday, ready to start their day. And that's one of those times where it made me stop and think, like, geez, we all just hop in the car and go do our routine, but at any moment, somebody's decision can really put a wrench in that whole plan. So condolences to the family here in Madera, and to all the families who have lost victims or who have lost family members and have been victims to driving under the influence, drivers out there who are making bad decisions. So, yeah.
Yeah, our condolences.
Yeah, good point. Well, that about wraps it up, huh, guys?
Yeah, it sure does.
Yeah. Well, we'll catch you guys next week. Like, subscribe, and comment. Let us know what you think. Modern day slavery, working, debt, any tips that you may have to either get out of it, or what you may consider good debt. That's also a good segue. So reach out. Take care. Have a good day.